Welcome to our last of the CHM Presents events for 2009. My name is Corey Lyle. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at the Computer History Museum. John Haller, our CEO, is in Russia for about 10 days. He's in pursuit of some Eastern European artifacts, so we wish him well and hope he comes back with a funny hat for us. Tonight's program is an evening with author Chuck House in conversation with KQED's Dave Iverson, discussing the book, The HP Phenomenon. And for those of you who haven't bought a book yet, this book tells the story of how Hewlett-Packard innovated and transformed itself 6 times while growing revenues and profits consistently. It describes those transformations, how they started, how they prevailed, and how the challenges along the way were overcome, reinforcing David Packard's observation that, quote, change and conflict are the only real constants. This book also details the philosophies, practices, and organizational principles that enabled this unprecedented sequence of innovations and transformations. In so doing, the authors captured the elusive spirit of innovation required to fuel growth and transformation in all companies, innovation that is customer-centered, contribution-driven, and growth-focused. Our author tonight, Chuck House, is certainly an intelligent and interesting person. He's candid and witty, and he's the only person in the history of Hewlett-Packard to win the company's award for meritorious defiance. So you have to make sure you ask about that on your Q&A cards. That being said, the dedication to the book also provides a glimpse into Chuck's character and his love of HP. I know the Computer History Museum shares a great love of Hewlett-Packard, and I'm sure many in the audience do as well. How many people here have worked for Hewlett-Packard? Raise your hand. Ah, fantastic. Welcome. Welcome to the museum. So, you're going to love the dedication to this book. We dedicate this book to the men and women, past and present, of the Hewlett-Packard Company, who made it what it became, who nurtured it into greatness, and who persevered through 6 transformations to keep the HP way alive for other generations. So that's a very nice dedication on the book. Let me introduce our moderator tonight, Dave Iverson. Dave has been a producer and anchor of the national, regional, and local specials for public broadcasting for nearly 30 years. Earlier this year, Dave was co-producer and correspondent for the PBS documentary Frontline, My Father, My Brother, and Me. Iverson was the writer, narrator, and co-producer of the 1999 National Emmy Award-winning PBS documentary, The 32nd Candidate, which aired nationwide on PBS. He has written, anchored, and supervised production of over 25 other primetime television documentaries for national broadcast on PBS. Currently, Iverson hosts programs for KQED Public Radio and Television in San Francisco. Dave is a graduate of Stanford University and received his MS in Telecommunications from Indiana University, and we're certainly glad to have him here tonight. Our author, Chuck House, is the Executive Director for MediaX and Senior Research Scholar in the Human Sciences and Technologies Advanced Research Institute at Stanford. Previously, he led the research collaboratory and served as the Director of Societal Impact of Technology for Intel, after executive management positions at Dialogic, Spectron Microsystems, Veritas, Informix, and of course, Hewlett-Packard. Chuck is highly educated. He has a BS in engineering physics from Caltech, a master's in EE from Stanford, an MA in the history of science from the University of Colorado, and an MBA from the University of California, San Diego. As many of you know, Chuck is a strong member of our Board of Trustees, and we're thrilled to honor him and thank him for his work tonight on this book. So just a couple administrative. We'd like to thank Intuit for their sponsorship tonight, and also to let you know that Kepler's will be selling books downstairs afterwards, and Chuck will be signing books. And also, please get your Q&A cards ready a little bit early tonight so that we can move things along. And I know you're going to have good questions since many of you worked at HP. And I'm going to welcome Chuck and Dave to the stage. And Chuck's going to give us a brief introduction before the interview starts. So please welcome Chuck House and Dave Iverson.
Thank you. So here we go, huh? Thank you very much, first of all, for all of you coming out. This is sort of astounding. I've had 8, 9, 10 people sometimes in audiences, and this is pretty big. And I'm a little scared because I think I have to figure this machine out. Let's see what happens here. Do I have to point this some direction, or do I do that, or that? Maybe that. Oh, look at that. I found the way. So, the HP way is well known and well regarded, I think, certainly in history. There is some question about how relevant is it today, and in some level we're going to try and address that tonight, I think, because the question facing the nation is, where are the jobs? I mean, 12% unemployment in Silicon Valley is just nuts. And so presumably Dave and I can produce some answers on that. We'll see what happens with that. But I thought it might be useful, first of all, to talk about what makes a great company. And we're going to have a little civics lesson here. If you talk to the Wall Street Journal folk, or Forbes, or Business Week, or most company managements, they say something like this: revenue, profits, growth rate. That's what we pay attention to, right? This is your turn to murmur. Yeah, okay. And if you talk to shareholders, they think share price, return on investment or assets or something like that is really where it's at. And there is sometimes a belief that there's a connection between these two. Now, during the dot-com boom, there wasn't a lot of connections. Share prices went pretty high without any revenue or profit. So you get the idea. Then a lot of people observe that employees are important to companies. And sometimes they say, employees really don't care about the top two nearly as much as they do who's my boss and what's the team like and am I satisfied at work and what are the benefit packages, right? And one of the beauties of HP, I think, was early on, like very early on, the two founders said, we want to have everybody in this company an equity shareholder, and we want to have profit sharing for every person every 6 months. And what happened was you had machinists out on the production line coming into the lab, buttonholing engineers saying, they had some colorful language that I'm not supposed to repeat here tonight, but basically they would invite us to be a little more careful with how we were profligate with their money. So you had this entire corporation worried about how to be successful together, and it was a very interesting mix. There are some people that think ethics and community role and things like that matter too. Most companies tend to make sure they don't get in the negative side. Enron, you remember that story? That's not the way you want to be thought of in an ethics kind of course. But few companies, at least in my experience, go out to be proactive in this kind of thing. And this is one where Dave Packard, very early, again, got kind of in front of the curve and spent time explaining that if you're not proud of your company in the neighborhood you live, it's really pretty hard for you to do the kind of job we'd like you to do. So they tried to integrate all these kinds of things. What I always find interesting is if you talk to customers, none of these really particularly matter. What they like to see is something that works. And, all things being equal, the features, the quality, the contribution to their job is, after all, the bottom line. And so the question is how do you make all this in balance and how do you make it holistic? And I think we've all seen companies that can drive against maybe that top left-hand corner, maybe even to some degree the top right-hand corner, and lose sight of the fact that it's got to be an integrated, holistic kind of look. Now, this audience, HP people may be accepted. But let's say a computer history museum, normal audience, there's one more category, and that's called who pioneered what, who invented what, and where's the innovation? If you've been downstairs through our big memory display, or you come next year to the big timeline display, we get off fairly big on who did what. Doesn't matter whether it worked. It's really cool if it's cool. So this is kind of the view of what makes a great company if you're in the museum business. Fair? So I just thought I'd show you a little bit. So here's the 3 things we'll include next year when we roll out the timeline that came from HP. And odd as it might sound, generally speaking, these are not the things HP thought were very interesting. The center one we did like because Hewlett did that, but the others were kind of minor, and it's kind of interesting. So let me show you, since today's December 7th, this was one product we rolled out on December 7th, and it's ironic because it had a Japanese engine. And that's a particularly neat day to roll out a Japanese partnership, don't you think? We called the guy. So I had the interview, I had the date. I didn't do the interview, and I called this guy and I said, could you just check a date for me? And he gets out a scrapbook and says, oh, here it is, Idaho Statesman, December 7th. I said, don't you think that's odd? And he says, why? So here's kind of the way we do it. Gary Starkweather, we will honor in the museum. He invented the laser printer at Rochester Xerox in '69. Rochester didn't care, and Xerox PARC later didn't particularly care, until IBM rolled one out 7 years later. You know how that works? Then they brought one out, and then we lowered the price 4 to 1. Huh? And we sold one in the first 4 months against a forecast of 75 a month. Then the same guy says, well, I know the secret now. Let me drop the price 3 times. He did. Then he put another number on it, the 2687 instead of 88. You know, these were catchy terms. And lowered the price again 3 times. And that would have worked, except it caught fire in the customer facility. And then he said, okay, I've been at it 9 years. I've spent $41 million on R&D, and we've got about $12 back in return. I think I have it this time. And we called it the 2686. Huh? You see the program? You see how we numbered things? And then somebody came along and says, why don't you call it the Laserjet? And a mere 5 years later, HP ran the first story about the first $1 billion product we did. Look at what happened. It went to $129. That's innovation. Huh? And somewhere in there, HP finally said, you know, this might actually be a winner. The timeline won't have the world's best-selling business mini because it was a 16-bit machine, not a 32. It won't have the world's first successful personal computer because personal meant engineers, and they don't count. It's not like Wozniak's stuff, although he worked on that. It didn't count the world's most popular financial calculator, which could have come from a financial company instead of an engineering company. And it didn't count the first multilingual intelligent terminals. I won't bore you with all these. We're going to have a quiz later, but you know. But these are the guys, the short guy and the tall guy. We had other names. Worth mentioning that even though HP didn't really do silicon, we had more semiconductor processes in place by a factor of 2 than any other company in the history of the globe. So it wasn't like we didn't do them. These are the same 2 guys. We actually started in 38. The first year finished was 39. You know, when a baby's 1, it's already been around for a year? That kind of thing. These guys followed him. John Young on the left and Lou Platt on the right. I do this so we can frame the discussion later so you just know who the pictures are. You might remember the one on the left is named Fiorina, and the one on the right is Mark Hurd, current CEO. And they got more press for HP than some others did, and I'm not going to spend time on that. But we had a couple of key strategists, and their names sort of didn't get talked about too much. Paul Ely on the left put HP into computing because, get a hold of this, because we built a digital voltmeter. We were the 10th company to do so. And it could make 6 readings a second, and no technician could write that fast. Now, Maybe the other companies found fast technicians, but we couldn't find any. So we built a mini computer that could record all that. And that's why ours was ruggedized, because voltmeters go into harsh environments compared to MIS shops. The guy on the right is Dick Hackborn, served later as chairman of Microsoft. You might have heard of them, and put us into the printing business, among other things. And then we had a couple of technologists, and this is the key. We had 50 years of leadership from these two men. The one on the left, Barney Oliver, was the fifth American ever inducted both into the National Academy of Science and the National Academy of Engineering. Joel Birnbaum on the right was the only person to ever head IBM Research and HP Research, the two largest computer companies on the globe today. So it was kind of that, but it really was, 5 million other people that made the difference. Actually, that's not quite true, 500,000, sorry about that. It was a bottoms-up kind of company, and we might talk about that at length. But for now, why don't we shift, and I'll come over.
We're going to have our conversation, and then, as was mentioned at the beginning, we really want to hear from all of you, especially since we have so many HP, either current or alumni, here this evening. So be sure to fill out your question and answer cards, and we'll get to those in 20, 25 minutes or so and fold those into the rest of our conversation. But you started out, Chuck, by mentioning the jobs situation right now and the degree of unemployment that we have in California. 10% nationwide, as you said, even worse here in the Bay Area and in California. As everyone knows, there was a jobs summit in Washington, D.C. last week that President Obama held. And among others, he brought people in from a variety of industries from around the country to talk about job-creating strategies. And it got me to thinking about what if David Packard and Bill Hewlett had been invited to attend, if they had been around to attend the Jobs Summit. What do you think they might have said?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure Bill would have gone.
And how come?
Oh, he was a behind-the-scenes kind of guy.
Yeah.
He's not going to get out in public. Very reticent. But also incredible genius when it came to how technology works. And I guess what I saw last week was, and maybe I didn't see the whole program, but there was a strong emphasis on how business operates. There wasn't much emphasis on how engineering-led companies operate. And HP, both with Bill and Dave, was led around the principle of contribution as the thing that makes the difference. So if we were talking about a competitor with a set of products, you didn't build something to answer them. You didn't even go into that field unless you were already in it. You instead looked for something where you made a true difference in what was going on. And I didn't hear much of that last week. I heard putting more dollars into prime the pump. I heard more emphasis on government support programs. I did not hear this innovation focus.
And what would have been the key elements that began that philosophy that you mentioned before about looking at this in a more integrated way, that you can't just look at either of the corners that you presented in your slides, that it has to have a more integrated approach? What would be some of those elements that were true at the very beginning of HP that seeded the way for the kind of innovation that you're suggesting we need more of now?
Well, first of all, the Valley is full of, innovation type people. But these guys were a little different, I think, in two respects. They came out of the Depression, so you had to self-fund all the way. And they would only add people when they could see that they had a chance to keep them on the payroll. So it wasn't a hire and fire kind of thing. It was a, how do you get people that'll go with you for the long term on the tour? And I think you wind up having to deal with those elements around that mosaic if you want somebody to stay with you through thick and thin. So you build that sense of community or almost family early on, and I think they both understood that extremely well.
When people say the phrase HP way, or as Packard, of course, titled his own book with those words, what does it mean to you?
What does it mean to me?
Yeah. How do you define it?
Yeah, well, first of all, respect for the individual at every level of the corporation. So the dignity of the person and the focus on what they could contribute was huge. The notion that the person closest to the job is most apt to be able to decide what needed to be done to make that job better resonated with these guys. So that was core.
Where did that come from, this idea that things ought to be pushed down? You write in the book about how decisions need to be made at the lowest possible level rather than the highest possible level, which again is sort of an inversion of how you think of things typically being done. Where did that come from?
I haven't written this in the book, and I don't know this, but I think Packard had his nose rubbed a few times, and he said, well, that actually was brighter than I was thinking of. Now, he wouldn't have said that in public, but I think he just saw inspired thought on the part of a number of people, and maybe out there we can get some affirmation of that, but he would always respect somebody that had a great idea, and very frequently he'd act very surprised. And the next thing you know, he's very supportive. It was great.
We heard Graham mention that you once received a distinguished honor from Hewlett-Packard.
Yeah, I also got the Medal of Defiance.
That's what I mean. Tell that story, because it says something about not only allowing decisions to be made at a lower level, but encouraging dissent in a way.
So I was in the scope division and oscilloscope division, and we were the doormat of the company. And Tektronix was doing a quite good job. And we were trying end runs of every kind you can imagine. And one was, instead of building an oscilloscope, why don't you just build a computer CRT display? So think of a big TV bottle, but make it fast so you could watch Gandhi in 3 minutes or something like that. And it was kind of hard to find people that thought that was a major contribution. This is when teletypes were the only way you could enter into computer stuff. And Dave came out for review, and the division, or maybe the marketing manager said, there's a market for 31 units. And I wasn't in the room for the final playout, but Dave said, when I come back next year, I don't want to see that project in the lab. And so the next day I asked my boss, so I was told this the next day, and I said, well, if it's in production, how would that be? And it's supposed to be about a 2-year lead. Back then, things were more leisurely. And my boss said, you couldn't get it done in a year. And we said, well, so I asked the team was maybe 3 people. And we all, it's either you get fired now or you get fired in a year. So we said, well, sure we can. Well, we got it in production in 10 months. It was selling a few. We did DeBackey's first artificial heart transplant display on it. We did the moon landing, Neil Armstrong, you've seen that little clip. We did Doug Engelbart's thing. Alan Kay used it for the flex machine. So it had some nice play. But Packard didn't know all that yet, and his words were, I thought I said, he was fairly, what I'd say, dogmatic on occasion. And he was pounding his fist and saying, I thought I said to kill that. He had some colorful phrase. And I said, no, sir, what you said was you said you didn't want to see it in the lab, and it's not. It's in production. and actually, it didn't play as well as it could have. but 17 years later, he thought it was pretty neat, and he gave me this award. There's a picture of it in the book because somebody thought that'd be useful.
For extraordinary contempt and defiance, I think is
yeah.
But was that ability to allow sort of pushback key, do you think, to the HP story and key to innovation?
Yeah, so the company was a very decentralized corporation. I mean, if somebody had a new idea, as often as not, a new division would get spawned. So you didn't have to fight the people busy doing voltmeters to do something else. You just drew a new team around you. And what we found doing the research for the book, kind of to my surprise, was every division and every product line virtually had its version of a Maverick or 2 or 5 Mavericks. And they had persevered against pretty much their management, you don't want to say it quite that way, and got away with it. And the next thing you know, so that guy I talked about with the Laserjet printer, I mean, $41 million down a rat hole over 9 years, and he says, this time I think I know how to do it. I mean, he got funded.
Yeah.
This is crazy, Try that at Intel. I know.
To what extent, then, does that tie into the curious phenomenon that you describe in your book, which is that each time Hewlett-Packard sort of morphed into something else, whether it was from oscilloscopes to whatever came next to printers and so forth. The Packard, actually, rather than saying, that's right, that's what we need to do, sort of said the opposite.
Well, some people would call him a curmudgeon. I would never think to do that, especially in his presence, but because he was a pretty big guy. 5'17" is what he stood. Wanted to be one of the regular folks, so he called himself 5'17". Yeah, he was pretty skeptical about an awful lot of things. I'm afraid this is I wouldn't say it this way ordinarily, but I remember with the PC business, he said, the only thing worse than being in a little shitty business is to be in a big shitty business. And the vice president of personal computers took that as a bit of an affront. I don't know why that would be, but that kind of thing. But you got the chance to put it on the market and let the market prove for you, or for him, if you will, that it was worth it.
And are those things tied together? I mean, the fact that every time something came up that in fact Packard opposed it, but in the end allowed it, is that part of the secret to HP's continuing success?
Well, and it wasn't just that he allowed it eventually. If it worked, he got way behind it. So he really would be a strong supporter once he'd been convinced it's worth being there. And he usually had reasons, like I mentioned, that 35, where, if it completely alters. Did I tell the story about the cash in the till?
No.
I didn't tell that story. Oh, can I? Yeah, I think this illustrates it. So Hewlett did that HP 35, the little scientific calculator. And when I say did it, we had the $5,000 version. And he said, I think we could shrink that with integrated circuits and a thing called an LED, a light emitting diode, that hadn't really been built before, but we were building them. I think you could put it in your shirt pocket. So the first thing people did was buy him a shirt with a big pocket. and it went through a whole saga of different proof points, one of which was SRI, then thought to be a respected research house, said without any equivocation, this thing can't sell at this price, right? And he said, I don't give a damn, let's sell it, right? Well, we were selling 1,600 products at about a clip of 10 a month. Okay, giant job shop is what this company was. This thing goes to 1,000 a day, like in 5 months. Okay, so we'd never handled inventory flow like that. It's the first thing microprocessor based in the company. Very interesting. We didn't know how to take cash. Everything we had, we billed and built to order. So there was a guy in France that had 100 of these things, kind of like the book downstairs. They didn't know how to take cash, so he would give them out and take a check. And it turned out he died about 3 months later of a heart attack, I think maybe because he knew the problem. He had 100 checks in his desk drawer. He didn't know where to deposit them. We had no mechanism to take money. And it was reasons like this that Dave would get all whipped up. Well, we aren't supposed to be in that business because we don't know how to take cash.
Why was it that Hewlett-Packard resisted the computer transformation to computers in particular?
Well, the simple reason was IBM was our best customer. And the corollary was they were whipping the 7 dwarfs just on a daily basis, all of whom were 10 times HP's size. So if RCA and GE and Honeywell and all these big companies at the time compared to us are getting thumped, and here's our biggest customer is the thumpee, thumpor, yeah, thumpor, right? Why would you go up against that?
I want to ask you something about to return to the topic of the HP way and the culture of HP. And again, we'll welcome your thoughts on all of that as our conversation continues. But Chuck and I were on the radio last Friday on KQED's forum program. And as you recall, there were a lot of people who called in the second part of the program.
Yeah, they wanted to know about Carly Fiorina and stuff
well, we'll
like
get to that too. But they were sort of equally divided between people who had wonderful things to say about HP and how HP was still a great place, and people who said the HP way is dead and gone. It's not going to be the company that it was. So just starting from that point of the sense of kind of identity, in the book you talk about HP alumni, and we normally think about alumni of colleges, and yet there is this sense of HP alums and loyalty to the company. So describe why there is such a strong identity, because that in turn may inform why people have such strong feelings about whether the company is going the right direction now or is going down the wrong path.
Well, first of all, it was a giant family. So you felt like you were part of a family. Those points I mentioned, the ethics and the employee side, all tied to how the company did, you felt you were part of, you felt without question you were part of the ownership of that company.
And did that continue as the company continued to grow?
Yeah. Well, now I left there 20 years ago, so as one caller said, I didn't know from squat for the last 20 years, but which is not
public
true.
radio listeners
Yeah.
never use the word squat, by the way. That's just not.
That's right. I do remember that, and nice admonition. But anyway, the point is, you're part of this group. I can't tell you. So today I was at a luncheon for the Bay Area HP Agilent retirees. How many of you were there? Yeah, see, quite a few were there, huh? That's family.
Right.
And we had some inside jokes that were pretty good that I can't say here tonight, right? So, but here's the point. I would say half of them had gone on to other companies, but when you talk about it, they talk about we, and what they mean by we is me and HP. Yeah. We are, it's still my company, and that's how I refer to it. You think of it that way. I married it, and then I incidentally got married to a woman. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, Jay.
And what engendered that? I mean, there's the fact that HP had benefits early on, healthcare benefits, flex time, those sorts of things. Is it
these guys knew you. They walked by, they knew you by first name, they knew your family, they were at the picnics with you. It was a camaraderie that's more like foxhole management, I think. I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what others might have to say later, but it was a very deep feeling. And I've been with a number of other companies. I've never seen anything like it.
And was that more easily fostered because the history of HP is one of decentralization, both in terms of decisions being made at the lowest possible level, but also because you had so many locations all over that allowed multiple families.
Well, he had multiple families, but the remarkable thing was Dave and Bill would get to every site every year, and they would keep track. And now we had name badges so they could cheat. And sometimes if you put on the wrong badge, it's always fun to put on the wrong badge and see, if they really knew you or if they knew your badge, and they generally knew you.
Management by walking around, to use that phrase.
MBWA worked.
One of our listeners on public radio, I don't know if any of you heard it last Friday, but called up with a wonderful story of sort of the ultimate in management walking around. This was when David Packard came to China in the mid-1980s, perhaps, I guess, is that right? And went to see where some of the employees lived, and took the time to do that, visited in someone's home, and saw that person had an aquarium, and said, "Oh, that's great, you have an aquarium. I have an aquarium too." Referring, of course, to the Monterey Bay aquarium. Let's play a little word association. Can we do that, Sean?
Sure.
All right. With HP's CEOs. Okay?
Uh-oh.
So.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
David Packard.
Well, certainly charismatic and bold and decisive.
William Hewlett.
Inquisitive, behind the scenes, and demanding.
Demanding in what way? Because I think of him, we always wind up talking. I don't know if you
This
find this
teddy bear
experience.
guy, yeah?
Well, and we talk more about Packard in the main, don't you think?
I think Hewlett was the unsung hero of the company.
How so?
In a couple of important ways. He was the guy that moved us into international very early. We were the first company into some very major places, including Japan and China, to pick a couple. His love of decentralization is what drove that. That was not Dave, that was
That's
Bill.
more Hewlett.
Very much so. And his curiosity was insatiable. So this drive from the 2116 Mini to the personal computer to the pocket calculator was Bill. And the great story to me was he took the HP 35 calculator, and I think Francais Rodet may be in the audience, to New York. And this little marvel that does transcendental functions, which all New York analysts are familiar with. And he gives everybody a calculator and proceeds to wax eloquent about this machine, only to find out not one of them knew what sine or cosine or tangent is about, right? And he was just floored. And he said, and the one key they should know about, e to the x, they don't even know what that means, right? So he came back and he says, I think we ought to commission 2 people to build a financial calculator so these idiots on Wall Street can use this. That's inspired.
And now we know what he would have done if he had gone to Washington over the past year.
Yeah, as a matter of fact.
Staying with Hewlett-Packard for a moment more then, is it possible to sort of peel off, when you think of, again, the HP way, what parts are Packard and what parts are Hewlett?
Well, I'm sure you could. But the way Terman treated it, I thought was great. He said, everybody thinks Hewlett is sort of different than Packard. He says, what's remarkable about these two, and it got demonstrated in '69 when Packard went to Washington, he said, one stepped in where the other left off and you hardly noticed. And I think that's remarkable. I heard a different way, and I have to think about the guy's name, Roger Haynes. Clark Kerr and Roger Haynes were the successive 2 chancellors of the UC system. Clark had an opportunity with Ronnie Reagan to step down when Mario Savio gave him a little test, you might remember. Well, you all won't. Yeah, some of you will remember. Haynes leaned over one night. I was seated between them because they weren't what I'd call collegial. And Haynes leaned over and he said, you know what the problem with the Hewlett-Packard Company is today? And I didn't know what. And he said, the board, this was with one of the later presidents, the board has cloned Dave 7 times and forgot to include one of Bill. And I think that captured it fairly well. Yeah. You needed them both.
Let's go back to word association for a moment. John Young, the next, the person who led the company after.
Aristocratic, strategic, non-charismatic. Is that a word? I don't want to say it that way. Not exactly methodical, but operations and efficiency minded. How's that?
And Lou Platt.
Oh, teddy bear. Absolutely empathetic. Absolutely the perfect embodiment of the HP way. He probably did the HP way in terms of concern for individuals, for minorities, in terms of job level security or satisfaction, in terms of healthcare benefits. He probably outdid either of the founders. I mean, just genuinely cared about how people experienced the work life.
We're going to get harder now.
You want to, okay.
Carly
Fiorina. Yeah, well, is Carly here tonight? I actually, I think she was bold. I don't think anybody challenged that she was bold. She was very strategic in my view. I think she saved the company in the sense of the company with the name and the size it is today wouldn't be there if it weren't for Carly Fiorina. So she was truly important for what it has become. How's that for positives?
Well, it's interesting because whenever her name comes up, when I was talking to someone about doing this interview, that's right, other words do come up. And even in terms of the strategic choices that she made, if you go to the compact merger, for example, it was viewed at the time that the CEO at Sun at the time said this is going to be a collision between 2 slow-moving garbage trucks, is the quote that you put in the book.
I thought that was a great sentence.
But in the end, the judgment that you come down with in your book is that it was the right decision at the right time.
They had few options, is what's hard to appreciate. The industry was consolidating. She had missed on the PricewaterhouseCoopers thing. And so the services element looked hard to grasp at that point. And the industry was imploding. The Compaq had shrunk by 35% in 9 calendar months, firing their CEO and changing that out. Several others were in deep problems. And her assessment, I think correctly, and the guy who the garbage truck comment, I can't remember his name, maybe McNeely?
Scott McNeely.
Yeah. Their place didn't fare so hot either. Their stock price plunged 97%, a relatively immodest fall.
Why do you think?
She called that.
Yeah.
She called that. What was hard for people to grasp, I think, was the fact that large mergers are tough. Yeah. And the track record in the American computing industry, including one she helped with NCR and AT&T, don't work. What was remarkable at HP is a team was put in place to do cultural integration that actually worked pretty well. And I think the other day I said something about Webb McKinney, who called me later to offer some words of advice and stuff like that, but he did thank me for mentioning his name.
When you think of that being the right decision, what was it, though, perhaps about the way the decisions were made during Fiorina's tenure at HP that many people do associate, fairly or not, with the end of the HP way?
Well, there were several pretty awkward junctures. First of all, from 2000 to 2002, there were massive layoffs throughout the industry. HP had one particularly interesting time where they managed to put out, let's call them resignation notices or pink slips, maybe that's the right word, along with an opportunity to pack your bag and leave that day. So that says a lot. At Agilent, which had more percentage-wise layoffs, you got the 2 weeks, you got to say goodbye to people, you got to have a goodbye party. Ned Barnholt walked people to their cars, kind of in a supportive way. So I think it was a style thing.
So more how the decision was made?
It was just this kind of ruthless, we had a number of people say, hey, an outside firm did the list, it didn't matter where you were from a merit standpoint, it was just this project goes, that project goes. That doesn't, in terms of this family attitude, that does not play. So I think it's those kinds of things that really cost her deeply.
And what has happened then since in the Mark Hurd era, particularly in terms of fostering, again, the HP way? Or, as we've all seen, of course, the company has continued to merge with 3Com and others and continued to grow. So if you had to give a sort of status report of the HP way, under Mark Hurd in particular, what would you say, Joe?
Well, Bill Krause is in the audience, so I can't talk about 3Com. And that's not done yet, right? But EDS is done. I think Hurd is absolutely an efficiency expert. So operations have been streamlined. The attitude is pretty much buckled down. I'm not sure how the innovation game is playing there these days. We hear some interesting things out of there. This is going to be on YouTube, so I have to be fairly careful. But it has the feel from a lot of people that things are different, that it's driven very much. So let me phrase it a different way. I mentioned this engineer-led versus business-led, and I mentioned tops-down versus bottoms-up. The old HP was a bottoms-up engineering-led company. Intel was a tops-down engineering-led company. Cisco today, I think, is a bottoms-up business-led company. Most companies today, and I would include the new HP, are tops-down, business-led kind of thing. And that's just a different model. And it does not follow the HP way kind of elements, generally speaking. You might retain a lot of that, and a lot of groups do. But it's a much harder model. It's a much more cogs in a wheel model. And I don't know that it's just marked by any means, but I think you could characterize HP today that way.
Just going to pose another few questions, and then we'll start turning to your questions. So again, if you have something that you'd like to write down and pose to Chuck, just write down on your questions, pass them over to Carol or one of the other staff people here from the Computer History Museum. So at this moment that we're at in time, we now have a company with over 300,000 employees operating in 170 countries. Revenue forecast, I think, is something along the lines of $120 billion for the next fiscal year. That all sounds fabulous. Within that, what are the key challenges that you think remain for HP, both as a company that can continue to grow and prosper, but also the company that will foster this warmer aspect of the HP way, the kind of company that also takes its civic duties so importantly as well?
Well, a $120 billion company sounds impersonal, just for the very size of it. Sounds more like Walmart than it does like, like 7-Eleven, say. I think the challenge for an HP right now is, I mentioned, or Carey mentioned in talking about the book, and we haven't said anything about these 6 renewals, but the secret is every decade, a different line of business became the biggest business in the company. The question is, what's next? Yeah. And I think is maybe a way to think of your question. And the what's next is hard to say because you can see that the PC business is maturing. I'm not sure everybody in this room wants to believe that, but it's, it's maturing. Netbooks aren't going to save it. The iPhone business has already been won by someone else. The printer business, it turns out Kodak had problems with film, right? And we got the printer ink business. Well, it turns out with displays, you can put all that stuff on screens today. Nobody prints that stuff anymore. Don't want to say it quite that way, but that business is in challenge. So what business do you do? If you're not running R&D, they've dropped R&D percentage from 9% to 3% in the last decade. They're spending less on personal computer side than Dell is, and Dell doesn't invent anything. I can't say squat, so I have to, I'm not sure where they're placing their bets, in other words. Yeah. And I think the question is, you've got to place some bets.
But that raises another interesting question in a way, because as you write in the book, they've gone through all these transformations to become a company that started with oscillators that were first purchased by the Walt Disney Company in 1939 to make the soundtrack for Fantasia, to a company that specialized in the next product, to printers, to computers, to so forth and so on. But as you've also pointed out, those were also markets that sometimes Packard didn't believe in or actively resisted. So is it important to place your bets? I mean, it seems in an odd, sort of counterintuitive way that Hewlett-Packard has managed to succeed without knowing what the next logical thing to do was.
So we don't have to worry.
So to your questions. Can you please re-poll the question and ask who has worked at HP and who is still working at HP? Okay, so let's hear from the alumni first. How many people once worked at HP? So, okay, what would you guess, Chuck? Maybe 50 people or so? Something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So, and how many people are currently working at HP? All right, smaller, maybe 15 to 20. Okay. All right, so we'll hear if there are differences in the 2-to-1 ratio between alums and current. Here's a question about how Bill and David complemented each other. You said something really fascinating a moment ago, that in some ways Bill was the unsung hero, but that the secret in many ways is that they always were willing to sort of backfill for each other, to step in.
What's the question?
How did they go about doing that? How did they wind up being able to so effectively complement each other, given their differences, not only in stature, but expertise?
Well, I don't know. I mean, none of us ever figured that out, to my knowledge. I interviewed a couple dozen people, and they all said, I never knew. So that's how I treat it in the book. Beats me.
What was the marketing advantage of the name Laserjet, and what made it successful over earlier versions?
Well, 2686A is not what you'd call a snappy, rememberable number. So anything would be better than that.
And what made it successful over earlier
Well,
versions besides a better name?
So in the early 80s, lasers were big, and so that just, and a fast laser, Laserjet, just sounded kind of cool. It actually came out of the personal computer group, is where the name came from. Now, why they picked that name, I don't know, but say again the rest of the question.
No, that's it. It was just what made it successful over earlier.
What made it successful was it was cheap and it worked.
Yeah.
And the key thing, this thing had an AMD 2901. I know you said we shouldn't do technical, but this is a it had a bit slice computer in it at a time that the IBM PC had an 8088 in it, which was and what would and this thing got tied to PCs, and which HP hated, because we're supporting IBM. And then it was the IBM support person would say, well, we don't know about that. So if your system doesn't work, we can work on our piece. And we didn't have anything to lose. We said, well, we'll fix the system. Huh? Pretty neat.
Here's someone who, this comment was written before your talk, and we have touched on that some about the role of the CEO in promoting and continuing the HP way. And whether or not your sense, acknowledging that you haven't been there the last 20 years, but your sense, the degree to which it still supports employees, still engenders that kind of loyalty to people who are at HP.
Well, let me give you a quick example. So I did a talk at Kepler's about a month ago. And just like tonight, a lot of questions about some of the different CEOs and the different styles, and I'm pejorative just like anybody else. And the room had a lot of fun with, how bad it is now. And in the lineup, there are like 6 in a row, just, hooping and hollering and having good fun, and we're all sport. And the next kid comes along, and he's there at HP now, and he says, my group works. I mean, this kid was literally in tears saying, I don't know what you're talking about. This is the best company I've ever been at.
Yeah.
And I've had dozens of people come up and tell me that in the last month.
Rumors of its passing are much
so
exaggerated.
it's department specific or it's group specific. It has to do with whether your manager manages to that instinct, but I can tell you there are a ton of places in that company that are still absolutely fabulous. It's all relative, find another $100 billion company and make the comparison, or $10 billion. It might be, these are different than startups, but I've been truly stunned and thrilled to find that set of deep positive feelings in this company, because this company is historically one of America's icons, and it'd be sad to think of it gone.
Here's a good one. About 20 years ago, you stated that HP would be bigger than IBM. Is that true? Did you say that 20 years ago? Mm-hmm. Yeah? All right. So what was it that made you say that?
Who wrote that?
Your wife, apparently. So what was it that made you know that?
Well, I didn't know that, but you could just see the trend line. We built good stuff.
And here's the tougher part, your prognosis for what things will be like 20 years from now.
Oh. So I put 2 scenarios in the book near the end. Scenario A, the 100th anniversary, which will be 2038, actually, if they count right. They'll be assembled at the garage, and people will be murmuring, this is the greatest place, it's the largest company on the globe. What has made it so neat? Scenario B is they're assembled at the garage, the 7 people left, and they say, this once was a remarkable company, I wonder why they let it go. How's that? So I've finessed the question.
A number of people are asking this similar question about whether or not HP, as in some ways this person writes, lost its soul in the process of becoming a huge, and also whether or not it's possible to keep to your original values given the global environment that we are in today.
And that's actually, I think, a quite responsible question. I don't think any of us know. I think a company of this size, regardless of its heritage, is a very tough proposition, and I think the competitive spirit of the globe today, and especially the resources available in other countries thanks to the tools we've all built, has changed the rules tremendously. But I have to believe that there's some things we can draw on. A couple of examples. Decentralized is going to work for the globe. The world is decentralized, you might have noticed. The trick with a bottoms-up company is you can hear what gets said somewhere else and empower it. Whereas a tops-down company, you're deciding here about there. And those are radically different in a world connected by virtual technologies. And so, to me, the old HP style, the engineer-led, bottoms-up, decentralized belief in the individual style is the right way to think about a world of 2050 for the way the globe will look.
So it's a kind of back to the future approach is what's needed now?
Yeah.
And to what extent is then to keep
I
to
think
that?
that's independent of the size of the company to some degree.
And to sustain that, you mentioned a moment ago that HP is putting less into R&D now than it once was. Is that part of what you mean, that the company needs to get back to a greater investment in research and development?
I come from a world that believes that innovation happens partly because you spend money on it. So yeah, for 60 years in a row, they spent 9% per year on R&D. And to shrink that by 2/3 feels like you're making a different bet. IBM has kept it constant through this last decade over the previous several years, as have most of the other Valley companies. So it feels like a determination to do it different, and maybe there's some good reasons.
This individual wants to know why HP is not perceived as an innovative company today. So maybe you can answer that in two parts. Is it still innovative? And if so, why isn't it perceived that way? Or perhaps why has it never been sort of viewed in the way that an Apple or a Google are viewed?
Most of HP's innovations historically were in fields nobody knew about. A revolutionary gas chromatograph isn't something that most people talk about at breakfast. Right? We did some absolutely wonderful things to measure the perihelion of Mercury, which is a planet, right? Not a lot of people cared. So a lot of the breakthroughs we did weren't exactly household words. The consumer business is very different that way. It's kind of got this hit mentality, and I think that's a different world than most of the historic innovation we talk about here, that I talk about in the book.
Here's something else that's not perhaps a term commonly understood, or at least it's not to someone who's not involved in technology or engineering, but you do write about this in the book, and that's how risky was Birnbaum, that's Joel Birnbaum, who took over R&D from Barney Oliver. How risky was his push to move to RISC technology?
How risky was his push?
Yeah.
Well, it was a bet the company strategy, so it was a little bit risky. The sort of the hard numbers so we'd been in this, I'll tell a story around that one. Whoever asked that, that's a great, you knew that I knew the answer, so that was good. And it's a safe answer, so I don't have to worry as much.
We're going to get back to unsafe next, so go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'll spend more time here then, yeah. So the drill was Joel and a guy named John Koch and several others at IBM had invented RISC architecture, RISC, which stood for Reduced Instruction Set Computing. And this was neat stuff, and IBM said, we don't need it, thanks. Thanks very much for inventing it, but we're not going to productize it because nobody is coming after us very hard anyway. HP, by contrast, has been in computing for 15 years. We were up to 25th in the world in revenues, 1/30th the size of IBM in computing, relatively small. And we needed some way to rationalize the 4 incoherent product lines we had. And so the idea was, let's go hire somebody that can fix it. We found a dissatisfied Birnbaum because he was stiffed at IBM. And he was persuaded this could work. And Dave said, well, if you're going to go there, that's fine. I've been resisting for 15 years, but tell you what, good idea as long as you set the goal to be number 1 within 25 years. Simple. And everybody thought the guy had lost it. right?
But that's also consistent in sort of all of these transformations and transitions.
Yeah.
It's always to be at that point in the pecking
So
order.
he backed it, providing we'd go for it.
There's another, you
Took
tell this,
us a decade to sell anything useful against that strategy.
and that's part of what's relevant too, is
Yeah.
allowing for time.
Right.
Tell the story, though, if you would, Chuck, about the hiring of Joel Birnbaum, because that's revealing in a way, too, because there was great interest to hire him at HP, and then IBM said, oh, no, we want you after all, essentially. And describe what Packard's response was to that.
Oh, this was actually pretty funny. Yeah, so Joel never told this story before, or at least he told us he'd never told this story before. And he said, we gave him a nice offer for the day, and he gets back to IBM, and they doubled his salary over what we'd offer him. And his first reaction was, you bastards haven't been paying me what you should have been all along, you know? Score one. And then Opal, or whoever the CEO was, had him over for breakfast on Sunday and told him, I'll give you a division, you can start a risk division, you can go for the gold, and we'll give you 700 people, it'll be great. He called HP, and John Doyle took the call and said, well, that's a pretty good offer, you know, and I don't see how you could possibly think about us. In other words, we're not going to play that game. And but if you don't mind, I'd like to have Dave Packard call. So Dave calls, and Joel reported that he says, you know, he says, I know, I guess it was Frank Carey, it wasn't Opal. And he says, I know Frank well, he's a really good friend, but he didn't start IBM. He says, I started HP. And he says, if somebody came in to do something as crazy as you're talking about here, you couldn't change the culture here that fast. He says, so how Frank's going to let you do that? How it'll work, I don't know. But tell you what, why don't tell us no, just take their job and try it for 3 weeks, and I'll come back and we'll have dinner and see how you're feeling. Huh? And he came back in 3 weeks. Actually, he sent John Young back in 3 weeks, who I said was non-charismatic or something. I've forgotten exactly the words. And both John and Joel describe it, that John gets off the plane and Joel rushes over and hugs him and says, I'm yours.
It's a great story because it's about a place that can make those sort of possibilities happen. Here's a tougher one. Can you cite specific outcomes that support your claim that the Compaq acquisition was necessary and that it contributed to shareholder value?
Well, that's one of those. If your aunt had different equipment, would she be your uncle? Kind of questions.
Talk about innovation.
I can't prove something like that, but we have studied pretty much the entire computing industry and also a number of other companies that went through this set of debacles. I'll give you a close specific, is how Agilent's fortunes went from 2001 to 2006 versus HP with the Compaq thing, or Dell, or IBM, or Sun. We went through kind of the whole set. We looked at Intel, Cisco, Microsoft as well. I think I'll take time later, but I think I can defend that fairly strongly.
Can today's companies, considering what their business models are, still have the patience to do elongated R&D? It's a really interesting question. I mean, especially if you put it within the context of what you were just saying about Joel Birnbaum and the 10 years it took to develop that. Do we still have the ability to take that kind of time? Does HP, does any company?
Well, what's the old saying? It took 30 years to have an overnight success. Call it the internet. or inkjet, or, most of the big technologies really took a long time. I don't think there's any question that in some of these fields you have to take the time.
And that's still a value we should be paying attention to.
I think we're going to see that in the green tech thing without any question. That a lot of these things need real invention and innovation, and they aren't going to happen overnight.
But how do you support that in such difficult times? I mean, given how troubled the economy is right now, how do you bet on time?
You simply cheat the current products. The way HP did it was we said the maximum we'll let you grow is 20% per year, because we're going to use a third of the R&D to work on further out things than on today's things. And we'll accept the problem that you have to grow slower necessarily, betting that you're going to build some more interesting things later. That's a hard thing for most business-led management teams to do, because they don't know what bets they're betting on. It's a tricky thing.
Here's an intriguing question, which you may or may not know. I don't think you touch on this, at least I don't recall it in the book. Did HP's China office help the Tiananmen Square protesters? Do you know? Or you're not saying?
I do know, and they did. We gave them asylum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When John Young, indeed.
And Herb Blomquist was the guy that did it. So, if you want to go applaud him.
When John Young retired around 1990, almost the entire executive team left at the same time. Do you know why? And did this sudden loss set up Lou Platt to fail?
Well, it was 92, and yes. They were invited to retire by the chairman, and they essentially retired. They were given opportunities to retire. How's that? Ever had those? It's great to get some of those packages. And yes, I think it emasculated him and left him without the bench strength for perspective. Kind of a shame.
We were playing a little bit of word association before with CEOs. Here's someone who makes the word association in terms of income. HP CEO Mark Hurd earns about $25 million a year.
42 last year.
All right, we'll up that to 42. What impact does high executive pay have on the HP way?
Well, I am told this, so I don't know this. I haven't audited the books, but there is a blog out that asserts that the top 4 people took $113 million last year out of the company, which is unconscionable to me. Up 73% from the year before. And I don't think the stock moved that far. I think Packard and Hewlett would have found that an unusual pay practice.
And when you think about the challenges that confront HP, how high up would you rank that?
9 on a factor of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very hard to talk about an egalitarian, democratic, dignity at all levels kind of company where it's that skewed, it seems to me.
In the 1960s, HP had many technicians and few degreed engineers. Does that explain?
When?
In the 1960s,
okay.
HP had many technicians and few degreed engineers. Does this explain product development and strategic direction?
Meaning they were better?
I don't know. It's an interesting. Is that? Did you find that in your research?
Well, we had one meeting. It had to be roughly 84, and we brought out the head of Bell Labs, and Ian Ross was his name, and he stood up and he was talking about the taking apart AT&T. Remember that, the consent decree or whatever, and he said we have 25,000 PhDs, as I remember, maybe 2,500 25,000 PhDs, I think it was, and somebody said, well, we have a 300 to 1 advantage on that. So I don't know, maybe that. We had our PhDs, everybody in our place knew how to build something. Maybe that's the point of that message.
Yeah.
Huh? Yeah. I mean, that, you had to be good. You had to know what worked. And that's how you started. You came to work and you went to work the first day. They gave you a bench and a soldering iron and a variac. Remember those variacs? Jesus Christ. Yeah. And I didn't know what one was. So, but you learn pretty quick, that's pretty useful.
Should HP have spun out Agilent?
Nope.
How come?
Oh, think about what you could do in an automated world with sensors and robotics and the whole measurement systems world if you could combine computing and real automated systems. That would have been awesome because they had every transducer for every kind of signal you might want. I think it would have been an incredible systems play. Still could be. No, I didn't say that.
We've touched on this, but add, if you will, to this, Chuck, what will become of HP Labs? What will become of its focus on research and innovation?
I think research labs around the country are under siege. Xerox PARC and Bell Labs and HP Labs were among several Sarnoff labs, were some incredible research beds. HP Labs was more pragmatic than most of those, but in general, they all took a longer view. Microsoft Research still has that, or maybe today has that point of view. Very few others do, including HP Labs. And I think we've foreshortened what we call research, and it's really almost entirely applied research. It's really advanced development, much more today. I think it augurs poorly for the country because the universities are unable to do systems research. The companies could, but they aren't.
Here's in some ways a related question, which is our last audience question, which is this person writes, I'm a volunteer science teacher working with teachers to develop science programs for middle school. Many students are turned off to science because of the scarcity of jobs. How do we entice them so that we will have scientists, engineers, and innovators in the future?
That's a surprising comment in a way to me because there are jobs in this field. But they're jobs that I don't think we describe very well, and I don't think they're jobs that are known by certainly the high school science teachers or the curriculum advisors or things like that. A couple cases in point, the H-1B visa problem has been notorious. I mean, we're really looking for talent still. Most of these companies, including HP, are hiring abroad because you can find the talent there. It's really the skill sets that you need. One that I've been impressed by is our science tools are fragmented and disjoint. Whereas everybody knows Microsoft Office now. 30 years ago, you had to learn the tools of white-collar trade by yourself at your company. Today, it's all standardized in terms of spreadsheet and Outlook and all those other things. But that's not true for science or biology, chemistry, engineering. Each of those are still G jobs. You get LabVIEW and you get a math pack, but you don't have anything that's a sophisticated suite. And it seems to me if you had that and you started that in junior high school and you came on through, science would be a lot easier and a lot more fun. And then we'd have something more engaging.
Last question from...
You said the last one was the last
one from, but this is the last one from me.
Oh, okay.
Why does HP still matter? It seems like an obvious thing to ask, and I mean not because it operates in 170 countries and is going to make $120 billion and has 300,000 employees. But coming back to how we started our conversation about the times in which we live and the challenge to grow our economy and provide jobs at a time when we're so hurting, what does HP and the HP way teach us? What is it that you would like people here tonight to come away thinking about that means that HP and the HP way still matters?
I guess I'd ask for each of the companies you're at or institutions you're at, are you proud of where you work? And do you talk to your neighbors and friends and family about that being a great place for you to make the kind of contribution you want in your life? And if it is, it's like an HP was. And if it's not, what are you doing to try and change it?
Chuck House's book is called The HP Phenomenon, Innovation and Business Transformation. It's a fascinating read. Chuck, thank you so much.
You might want to mention Ray Price as a co-author.
And Ray Price is the co-author as well.
Okay.
Always good to have attribution.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. What a wonderful discussion. I can't wait to finish my signed copy. Again, we want to thank Intuit for their generous sponsorship tonight. And a special thank you to Dave Iverson. You're so thoughtful and quick on the stage. It's just wonderful to have you. Thank you. So thanks again for your participation and your financial support of the Computer History Museum, and we look forward to seeing you downstairs. Thank you.